One of the great and challenging questions to resolve about this parsha is the Abraham of Genesis 18 versus the Abraham of Genesis 22. The Abraham who goes to bat for the people of Sodom, strangers, people defined by God from the outset as utterly wicked and deserving of destruction, and the Abraham just 3 chapters later, who is told to take his son, his only one, Isaac, whom he loves, and to offer him as a burnt sacrifice on Har HaMoriah. And Abraham says, Hineni, here I am, whatever you need, God. Hard to square that circle. Hard to square the circle between the one who can speak out on behalf of the city of strangers and the one who can't speak out on behalf of their own much loved and deeply wanted child. I pointed to a story which most of us know, which is the story of Abraham negotiating with God, sort of a shook negotiation in reverse. Of God, if I could find 50 righteous people, would you spare the city? And God says yes, and then 45, 40, 30, 20, and 10. And at 10, Abraham and God walk away from each other. Abraham doesn't continue on to 5 or to 3 or to 1. My friend, the novelist Amy Bender, says that there are people who have a problem seeing one. There are people who are really good at seeing groups, who are really good at seeing the big picture, and really are challenged by seeing the one right in front of them. I was trained as a nonprofit professional. Rabbis work in serious nonprofits. I was trained in the reporting of metrics. I did a lot of grant writing in my last job. And what a foundation wants to know is how many people did you reach last year? How many people did you reach this year? And what's the significant and meaningful improvement in numbers between last year and this year? How you reach those people, the depths of the connection with those people are much less important and certainly much more challenging to write about in a grant report. What the folks who control the big dollars in any community want to know is they want to know big numbers. And for a lot of us, thinking in terms of success in numbers comes very naturally. We had a great program at CBI. 100 people came. We had a less successful program at CBI. There were only 50 people there. We had an amazing day. It was Shabbat under the stars. Did you hear that almost 200 people were there? When rabbis gather at rabbi conventions, as they did in St. Louis this past week, they find a way to tell each other the number of members in their synagogue. Subtly. Oh, how interesting. I wonder what it would be like to only have 300 families. You must get to really go deep with them. Right? Rabbis judge each other based on the size of our congregations. And that temptation for numbers is not unique to the nonprofit world. It's not unique to the Jewish world. It's something that many of us struggle with. The ability to see the abstract crowd and the challenge of valuing the unique and holy soul in front of us. How many of the great men, sometimes women, but here this is a particularly male problem, how many of the great men, leaders in industry, leaders in government, figures of renown, have had terrible relationships with their partners, with their children, capable of speaking to the masses, incapable, seemingly, of expressing that same kind of love when the cameras turn off. This is a challenge for all of us to hold in mind. How do we not judge solely based on the number of bodies, on the number of impacts? How do we see it as equally important to reach the one and not just the many? David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, wrote a book a few years ago in which he talks about the difference between resume values and eulogy values. You might have come across this idea that there are the metrics of success in life that we put on our resumes, and there's the metrics of success in life that get talked about in our eulogies. And those are rarely the same thing. Our resume values tend to talk about the big groups that we have impacted, the projects that we have started, the positions we have held. Our eulogies almost always talk about a much smaller group of people who mattered a whole lot more. And so as we spend, so many of us, our lives filling up our resumes and not as attentive to what will someday be said about us when we're no longer there to speak for ourselves, it's a chance to reorient, to say, yes, of course, the impact on many is important, but if we can't see the one in front of us, we've missed so very, very much. I grew up with a little piece of paper on the refrigerator my mother put up there. It's a story that I don't know where it came from, and most of us have heard. It's a story about a little boy walking on the beach after a big storm and seeing all of these starfish kicked up by the waves. So many, thousands, littering the beach. And he's going along one by one, picking them up and tossing them back into the waves. And an old man comes along and says, "What are you doing? There are thousands. You can barely make a difference here." And the little boy picks up one starfish and looks at it, tosses it into the water and says, "It sure made a difference to that one." We are a tradition that says that there's a value to praying in minyan. There's a value to coming together in community. There is a value to spreading our message broadly into the world, to making the biggest kind of impact we can. But the myopia of Abraham, where he couldn't see the one, the most important one right in front of us, should be a warning to us all. We can't do everything, but we can do something. And it matters very, very much to that one. Shabbat Shalom.